You're very welcome. We really try to be very thorough with the information that we get. We make sure that it's very well vetted, and if we share information with you guys that is information that we've kind of speculated on or kind of come up with through our research as different scenarios, we've tried to be very upfront about whether or not that's, fact or that's coming from us as possible scenarios. So it's important to us that we don't just share information that is just out there. So we definitely are for certain that Floyd Gene McFadden is McFadden's grandfather. He is actually close to the same age as McFadden's alleged father would be. We know that McFadden was born in Kansas, in Wichita, Kansas. We know that he did most of his schooling at Indianola School there in Oklahoma. We could only find him through the 5th grade. We've learned that quite possibly he completed 9th grade in Kansas. We're not 100% sure on that just because we've not found documentation on that. That could quite possibly be true.
I guess if I had questions, it'd really be around why would LaDonna not let her son know who her dad is? Like, why was that such a big secret?
So I'm going to give you guys a theory here. So based on the fact that his potential father is so much older than LaDonna, so he would have been 27 years older. She would have been about 17 years old when she got pregnant and probably just barely turning 18 when she had him. Back in those days, that could have been more common than it is today. And so maybe there wasn't an issue. I am pretty certain that Jesse McFadden did not know who his father was. And the reason that I say that is that because of all the in-depth information that we've learned about him, it would not be in his nature not to use that to his benefit. With that being said, one of the things that we were having a hard time with when we looked into how the case ended up going about the way that it did, and when I say case, I'm going to say all his cases because it started before Crystal Strong's assault. So he had a couple cases that were kind of closed very abruptly, and in those cases there's people's names that you'll see all throughout the different cases. Some you'll see through all three, some you'll see through some of the little ones that were kind of taken care of in the beginning before even the grand larceny. After the grand larceny occurred, McFadden was placed on probation, and he was actually in violation of his probation for 7 months prior to the assault with Crystal Strong. So then after that, when he goes to prison, of course you guys know that there's a lot of prison infractions that he had. We actually have gained access to the 400 plus page prison document, and we've been combing through that. We'll be releasing that information as well. I can tell you that we did find additional prison infractions, and we will let you guys know what those are at a later date. We have definitely found some inconsistencies with some of the information that's come out, such as that Holly McFadden didn't start seeing Jesse McFadden until 2019. There's a couple things that conflict with that. One of those is a ticket that she received very close to the prison, and this would have actually been closer to about 2016. And then the other thing is that in the prison records, there is at least one that lists her as a visitor in 2018. So there's some conflictions there. Of course, these are things that we want to kind of solidify a little bit more before, we say, hey, this is what it is. But we do want to be very open and honest with you guys about kind of some of the things that we've seen and just kind of our initial comb through. We do believe that there is a lot of documents that are missing because there's a lot of gaps. Right now it's mixed up. We're trying to kind of put it in year by year order so that we can go through and kind of plug this into our timeline. I know that for the first part of our timeline, I want to say it goes through the end of 2017. This next one will go all the way to actually past when the murders occurred, giving you guys a little bit of details of some of the things that have occurred. Some of the things that are kind of interesting is the different people that have touched the cases and what has happened with those people who have touched those cases. And that would be such things as receiving awards, being promoted, being pulled up to be a judge, being pulled up to be a federal prosecutor. And those are very alarming when you see that a case is being pushed 5.5 years down the road. So, and it's not normal. And so how does Jesse McFadden's father play into that? Well, when we know that LaDonna doesn't make a lot of money, and we know that LaDonna doesn't have any, big connections, it makes a lot of sense that whoever's paying these pricey attorneys is somebody else. And so we believe that he is that somebody else. We have found some pretty alarming evidence that would be consistent with that. And we're going to continue to dig into that. And as we solidify that information, we will share that as well. This would include things such as money given to campaigns, for DAs, for judges, and that's a big deal. So when we first started working this case, this definitely wasn't a case that we were thinking anything like this was going to come out of. So this has been very an emotional journey for us, and so I know even more emotional for the families, because at every turn where we find something else, we're just kind of jostled again as to how horrible, this is. Not only should none of this occurred, the first incident shouldn't have occurred with Crystal, and then it shouldn't have occurred with Caitlin, and then he shouldn't have gotten out. So it's a really, really sad case. And I think that there's so much more to this case. And there are some additional things that we do know that we're not going to release at this time, because it would hurt the case, and we don't want to do that. So we will release that when we're able to, and I will tell you that will be pretty soon. We'll be able to release that information pretty soon. We know that within a couple days of the murders, that information was taken down off of OSCN. And quite interestingly, one night I had gone in to reference something because I noticed that some things were looking different from the initial time I had been in, and so I was kind of comparing them. And it just so happened that for Caitlin Babb's case, that a lot of her documents were up, and more than what were there before. So I started pulling them all down again. I had already pulled them before. I started pulling them all down again, and once I got to about mid-2022, everything just shut down. And when I logged back in, there was nothing there. So there's definitely some strange things going on. And I'm a little bit untrusting about some various organizations and agencies that have touched the case. And I think rightfully so. I think that we've all seen that this case has been grossly mishandled at so many different levels.
That's also been part of the reason why we've been very careful in terms of what we put out, because what we don't want to do is we don't want to put out information and then have government agencies pull the documents and make them not available for additional research. And so we try to stay ahead of the purge.
Right.
Yeah.
And so everything that we've discussed up until now, we definitely have documentation to support it, and we'll ensure that goes to the right hands. So
one of the things that we had talked about in our podcast was about Jesse in particular was the discrepancy with his age, in particular to what grade he was in as he was going through school. And we kind of alluded to the fact that maybe there was a learning disability or anything like that. Is that something that you were able to find in terms of the documentation that you've researched, or anything to that effect?
No, but when I look at his writing throughout, his court cases, and also through his prison file, he writes like somebody in probably middle school. So I wouldn't be surprised if he did only finish 5th grade. He doesn't write very doesn't write how you would see somebody like in high school write, something that I would see like a ninth grader write. So I wouldn't be surprised if he had a learning disability or did only complete the 5th grade. That truthfully, I don't know. I don't know for sure.
Okay. My other question is around the grand larceny charge. And I know we've done other interviews that haven't not been released yet. So I know some of this information hasn't gotten out there yet. But I kind of want to talk a little bit about Jesse's relationship with his grandparents and his mom, and what that meant in terms of that grand larceny charge that he got, how he felt about it, how he thought about it, the stories that he told about it in terms of sharing with others. Is that something you could talk about?
Yeah, so we do know that obviously that he stole $64,000 from his grandfather. I don't know who keeps that kind of cash in their safe in their home, but nonetheless, he did steal it from his grandfather. I know that he was dishonest like when he talked to Caitlin about it, he had mentioned to Caitlin Babb about the grand larceny, and his story of what had occurred was a little bit different. He didn't tell her that it was his grandfather. He also didn't share, he just wasn't honest about it. And so then later on, when she eventually found out the truth, he expressed that he felt pretty much shameful for, it being his grandfather, and that he felt really bad, and so that's why he wasn't honest about it. Something that was shared with her is that he had put the money away. And now if you've seen his court records, then you know that he says that he's broke, and initially he's assigned an attorney because he's saying that he's broke. So I don't know where that $64,000 went, if it changed hands, if it went into an account that he later had access to, something of that nature.
Oh, that's great. That's great insight. And I guess the next question that I have is surrounds the fact that we found out, or we discovered, that Jesse McFadden was married right before the sexual assault of Crystal Strong. That's something that hadn't been discussed or hadn't been brought up. And what are your thoughts around that?
So he was married. We did solidify that one, and that's just based on the fact that we did find Stephanie McFadden. She was Stephanie McFadden into 2004, but we do believe that was annulled. We don't believe that there was this, marriage and then this, divorce after he went to prison. And I'm pretty sure that it was annulled because he was in prison. She was young, he was young. And of course, at the time as well, he had a girlfriend. This would have been the old Holly that he was dating at the time as well. So he was dating somebody married when he assaulted Crystal Strong.
And you haven't tried to contact this Stephanie, have you?
I did, and one of the reasons that I kind of, first of all, I'm not going to badger her, but he did list that she was quite possibly in the Army. It appears me and Joe are both military veterans, and she was at every place that you would be if you were in the military, and to include right now, that may even be where she got out of the Army. But when we reached out to her, she's been married for a long time and has kids, and this just honestly may be a case that she just doesn't want to put her family through now that her kids are a little bit older, and just something that she may want to just keep behind her, and that's fine. So we didn't want to try to push her to do anything that she didn't want to do.
In terms of speculating on other potential victims, we've kind of speculated a little bit around Jesse McFadden's relationship with his younger brother Cody, and alluded to the fact that maybe there was some potential sexual molestation or sexual assault that had happened between Jesse McFadden and Cody, based on the kind of what was going on with Jesse at that time. Some other accusations of sexual assault of the 6th grader on the bus. And then what we eventually see happens with Cody as he gets older. I know Cody was described when he was in school, when he was going to school with Crystal Strong, that he was a nice kid and he had everything kind of put together. He wasn't a weirdo like his brother was. But then fast forward into his adulthood, then we start seeing him acting out, him getting in trouble. He's having problems with LaDonna. Can you speak to that and kind of share your thoughts on other potential victims in addition to the two that we know about?
Yes. So for starters, we do know that as they were growing up, they kind of had that, normal brother-brother relationship where little brother wants to be like big brother. Little brother's probably irritating to big brother. And of course, that's very common. What we do find is that at a very young age, they were staying home a lot, home alone. If you have not seen what the property looks like where they lived, very sad looking, they were very poor, and LaDonna worked a lot, so they were home alone. This could quite possibly have played into how Jesse McFadden did in school, to even include him maybe not paying attention. So when you're kind of having to parent your sibling, that can sometimes take a toll at school. One of the things that we've speculated on, because of the fact that there was somebody that came forward who didn't want their name out there, but came forward and spoke with Crystal Strong about the fact that she was sexually assaulted on a school bus when she was in the 6th grade and Jesse McFadden was in the 9th grade, is what she said, or he was somewhere around 16 years old. And when everything came out and she found out about Crystal, because she actually didn't know that Crystal had been sexually assaulted, she apologized to her and she's like, I'm so sorry, this happened to me. When I got home, and in her case, he threatened her as well, hey, I'm gonna kill you if you tell anybody. So she went home, she told her mother, and supposedly what occurred was that LaDonna spoke to her mother. They kind of swept it under the rug, and not to hear about again until this came out. And then she spoke with, what did you do?
Good. I'm just.
And then she spoke with Crystal Strong. So our speculation with Cody is, it's very rare in a case to see two siblings who are very violent, very I'll just say very violent. It's just very rare. It's very rare to see two siblings that are that, high on the spectrum for violence, and with the amount of issues that it appears that the two have. One of the reasons that I believe that Cody McFadden quite possibly was sexually assaulted is the fact that during that time where they were home alone for a long period of time, one of the things that people experience later in life when they've been molested as children is things such as arson and substance abuse and things like that. So in seeing how they grew up and then seeing how Cody is like kind of going through his adolescence into his adult life, that kind of all makes sense to me. And obviously this is speculation. We don't know this for sure. There's a couple things that kind of are red flags for me in that area. And one of those is the fact that when Crystal was assaulted, one of the things that she had mentioned to us is that when she went back to school and she saw Cody for the first time, that it was a very weird interaction. And kind of the way that she described how he interacted with her was very up to par with how somebody would react with you if they too were being assaulted. And it's kind of like a odd moment of like, I know what you're experiencing, like feeling bad. And again, I don't know this 100%. This is my speculation. Another red flag that kind of made me feel that this was most likely the case is the fact that then later on, when Jesse McFadden is released from prison, there's the incident that everybody's posted online where there was a protective order that was submitted supposedly by LaDonna. If you pay attention to how it's written, it's very much so written in a manner that appears to be Jesse McFadden, to the extent where he actually says defendant, which I don't know who calls their son defendant, but it looks like a prisoner wrote it. So I believe that was written by Jesse McFadden, but that incident taking place the way that it did and when it did and how things kind of occurred and the fact that Jesse McFadden was there when it occurred, I believe that there was some type of mental breakdown because he had gotten out of prison and now he's there, and I think it became mentally too much for him. We did learn that their relationship, obviously, McFadden, Jesse McFadden was in prison for the good majority of, Cody's life, from that point, that their relationship, they really was non-existent, and anybody that we've spoken to about LaDonna that's known LaDonna very much, that's communicated with LaDonna, we've learned that their relationship was not very good, her and Cody's relationship. It seemed that her and Jesse had a pretty close relationship.
That's really interesting, and we know that McFadden has a tendency to write letters and then try to put other people's signatures on it, because he did that with Caitlin as well. When he wrote the letter and sent Caitlin a letter and asked her to get it notarized and then take it to the courthouse. So it's not outside of his wheelhouse to do things like that.
Right. It's not. And I've seen some various documents that I believe to be, some of his writing that shouldn't have been some of his writing. So yeah, I would say that's pretty on par.
So we know Jesse McFadden sexually assaults Crystal, and then he attempts to commit suicide. He's rescued, and then he takes a plea, an Alfred plea. And part of that Alfred plea includes serving time concurrently for the grand larceny. And he ends up going to prison on January 16, 2004, and he stays there through October 30th, 2020. So we know that. Can you kind of talk us through his integration into prison life, what that might have been like for him, what he was going through, and speak through some of the infractions that you are aware of?
Yeah, so I do kind of see his prison experience as being more like Martha Stewart, because he had plenty of funding, plenty of contraband, all throughout his entire time in prison.
No disrespect to Martha Stewart. she's a G.
Anyway, so I don't think that he had a rough experience in prison. The infractions that he had, so the ones that I know that were published on the news, were things like cigarettes and testing positive for marijuana, and which, ding ding, you tested positive for marijuana in prison, but you didn't test positive for marijuana in your autopsy. That's pretty alarming. But he had a pretty consistent, not good behavior in prison, and I really don't understand how there just weren't red flags all over his record that indicated that he should not have been released, until he served 100% of his sentence. And he definitely shouldn't have been released with a pending case. That's just such an injustice. So I see somebody asked, how did he try to commit suicide? I hadn't read that part. So after he assaulted Crystal Strong and the police were called, they found him near, I don't remember the body of water, but they found him near some body of water in the local area, and he had slit his wrists. So obviously didn't do a very good job of it, but he slit his wrists. So then he gets taken into custody, and that's where he remains until his cases, goes through the judicial system and he's ultimately convicted.
And I think in our conversation with Caitlin, she also expressed that in sometime during his incarceration before he was released, there were moments when he was on suicide watch, and so that was not outside of his wheelhouse either.
Yeah, but there's also a lot of stuff in his prison record that doesn't align with what he told Caitlin. A lot of, he really, and his mother, both groomed Caitlin together, and throughout that process, the things that he tells her, you can tell in his letters to her and in his messages to her that he is numero uno in that conversation. And she's like the last thing in the conversation, oh, by the way, how are you doing? After he's told her everything he needs for her to do and what he wants and how he feels. So, she, and you got to think about the fact that she's a young girl and in a vulnerable situation. And so she's believing this, like anybody would. And do I believe that there was some realism in that, in that relationship as far as he thought? Absolutely. I absolutely believe that.
there was several instances of sexual incidents that happened while he was in prison. Can you kind of elaborate on Jesse's first his sexuality, what some of those infractions may have been in prison, and kind of what he shared with Caitlin as they were kind of communicating and.
Yeah, so I know that he never shared with Caitlin that he was gay or bisexual. He was at all male prisons, and the only access that he would have had to any females would have been if he were in some type of doing some type of work in the prison where there was females brought in, or if there was any female correctional officers. So the two sexual incidents that are logged, and I believe that there was plenty more, the two that were actually logged, one of them, he was naked behind the guy. And in the other one, the guy asserted that he was raped by Jesse McFadden, and there was actually a rape exam done on him. I don't know, because I haven't seen yet in all of the paperwork if that investigation was like a thorough investigation. I'm inclined to think no. From the stuff that I've skimmed through, I don't see anything that it really indicates like this is why we determined that this wasn't a sexual assault, and so they basically downgraded it and listed it like it was a consensual act between the two.
Is it possible that downgrade of that assault was for the benefit of the prison, maybe to improve their reporting numbers or anything like that? Like, was there a motivation for the Department of Corrections to lie about that?
Well, there could have been payments, there could have been some type of bribery. I mean, you just never know, honestly. One thing that is a little bit fishy with that particular incident is the fact that within, I want to say about a week later, you see that he has an assault that's listed in his, in his infractions right after that alleged rape. And so if it wasn't rape, those are so close together, I don't think it was a coincidence. I think it was a result of what had occurred. So.
While he was in prison, did he ever claim to be gay, or is that just the fact that he was having sex with guys? We're assuming. Did he ever self-proclaim to be gay?
He did, actually. On most of his paperwork, he did say that he was gay. He only became straight at the very end before he got out, and then you see that he starts marking that he's not gay. So.
Well, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
In terms of sexual assault. Typically, there's always a high risk of sexual offenders being sexually assaulted themselves. Do we know of any instances where maybe Jesse McFadden was a victim of sexual assault in prison?
I don't think of sexual assault. I do know that they list a couple things in there that look like maybe he would have had some type of altercation with somebody or would have felt threatened. And honestly, through most of his different facilities, very high number of sexual, predators in those facilities. So, like when you hear about somebody going to prison and they say, oh, if you're a sex offender, like you're a target, you got to think about the fact that, McFadden's walking around there with all this contraband and he's being supported by LaDonna. And so he's got a TV in his cell, and he's always got a cell phone, and he gets a cell phone confiscated, and within a week or two he's got another cell phone, if not probably the same day, honestly. So he's living a good life. So
yeah, for all intents and purposes. In terms of his jail time and his time with James Fleming, what can you share about that situation?
So this is really interesting. I had reached out to James Fleming very early on, and I'm very transparent about what I'm interested in talking to you about. I like to send you, like the big questions that we want to talk to you about. Obviously, when you're having a conversation with somebody, there's follow-on questions that you ask, but we like for you to know exactly what it is that we're going to talk to you about so that you're not uncomfortable and you're not surprised. And so when I had talked to him, Crystal had actually reached out to him after I had spoken with Crystal Strong. And he said, hey, I know that you wanted to talk to me. What kind of interview are you wanting to do? And so I told him, hey, I'll put together an outline. I'll send you some questions. And, I want to be very transparent with you. Like, I'm working to try to, I've found some things in this case, and I'm working to try to solidify this for the benefit of the families. And he said, send me the questions and we'll go from there. And so I sent him the questions and he said, don't want to do the interview. And one of the things that he said, and there can be some truth there, is that he's in a position currently where he kind of feels like he's under the state's thumb. And do I believe that there's some truth to that? Yeah, but I heard him in an interview speaking, and something that kind of stood out to me was he spoke about how Holly's information was possibly taken in his cell while he was not in the cell. Like I said, McFadden always had a cell phone. And in speaking with Caitlin Babb knows for a fact that she had some conversations with, Jesse McFadden while in prison, while he was a roommate of Fleming. So it just, some of the, I always say that there's a truth in every lie. I believe that he put some things out there and that he was trying to put some things out there for the right reasons. But I also think that he also wasn't being 100% truthful. So, but we don't have anything that like screams,
Foul play.
Yeah.
But you're speculating that potentially it wasn't like letters or anything that he went through. It may have been they were sharing a phone, and he may have gotten her phone number by James Fleming calling Holly and talking to her on the
100%. And I say that because it's very consistent with his behavior. And so one of the things that came out in our conversations with Caitlin Babb was that, he installed spyware on her phone. And so he knew the applications she had in her phone. He knew the contacts that she had in her phone. So I 100% guarantee you that he had that exact same thing on his phone in prison. And so anybody who used that phone, he had that contact information. Now, do I believe that there's, that there could be a possibility that, he was writing letters? Well, yes. McFadden, Jesse McFadden wrote letters all the time and to a lot of different people. So in those letters, obviously he's writing letters. Does that mean that, 100%, he didn't get it out of the phone? No, but I don't think that it was just taken and, out of some belongings of letters, basically.
You kind of mentioned Holly a little bit in terms of how Jesse got her information, and there's been a lot of dispute, especially between Holly's mother and the timeline when she was seeing Jesse. Can you speak to the timeline of that relationship and the ins and outs of that, and kind of where that started, where there was an interruption, and where kind of how it played out, knowing what we know now?
Well, so if you've heard any of James Fleming's interviews, he does talk about the time frame of when he was with Jesse McFadden. And of course, we've seen the records, so the dates are a little bit different than what he said. But nonetheless, Holly and James Fleming started, their pen pal relationship sometime in 2013. I don't even know where to begin to become a prison pen pal, but and I don't know why she would have been interested in being a prison pen pal, but they became pen pals. At some point, she's telling him that she loves him. And then sometime in 2014, when McFadden is about 30 years old, he becomes cellmates with James Fleming. And it's during this period of time where, he says that when they quit being cellmates, that he has to, shake down his space because he doesn't want for Jesse McFadden to have left anything in there that would get him in trouble because he's trying to get out of prison. And that within a couple months, he receives some letters from not just Holly, but somebody else saying, hey, this guy's, communicating with me. One of the questions that I told him that I wanted to ask him in the interview was, had he spoken to Jesse McFadden about Holly? And what did he tell Holly about Jesse McFadden? So there's a lot of questions that, and again, like our whole goal is to put the truth out there. And so I just, I don't know why he didn't want to answer those questions, but I do know that I've heard in one of his interviews where he talked about, I don't know if I want to say this until I talk to the family. if you're being honest, you're being honest. That's all I'm going to say. So,
in terms of some of the conversations that Jesse had with Caitlin, and in our conversations with Caitlin, one of the things that I realized about Jesse is that he really talked a lot about what was happening. And so I would believe that would be the case with his roommate if he was, you know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like they would have spoken about Holly, and he would have known some things about Holly. Also, another thing that I learned about in our conversation with Caitlin is that Jesse's tactic was to kind of spiderweb your network. So like, he would talk to you and then connect to anyone that you're connected to, and then connect to anyone that they're connected to, and that's kind of how he moved, and how he like a spider web.
It is, and truthfully, I think that if James Fleming were as uncomfortable as he says he was, I think that Jesse McFadden would have been moved bunks. And the reason that I say that is because he was moved a lot. In 1 year, I don't remember which year this was. We'll talk about this later, but in one particular year, I want to say that he moved beds like 26 times. So I'm pretty sure that if an inmate said, hey, like, I'm fearful, I'm, whatever, they would be moved, because even he did it. He did it at one point. So he claimed that he had grown up with family in the Ku Klux Klan, and that he couldn't be with blacks. So he did whatever it was that he wanted to do to be where he wanted to be, and they moved him around accordingly. So, if James Fleming were as fearful as he says he was, then, or as uncomfortable as he says he was, I'm inclined to believe that they would have moved him out of his cell into another cell, because they've done it so many times before. It would have been common, basically, for him.
And sooner Lil Sis says, a lot of people here think Holly may have known more than what we think, and we also think that Holly knew more than what everyone is aware of. And there's that kind of came to light with the autopsies, and in the podcast where we covered the autopsies. Can you talk a little bit about that to shed some light on where you think Holly's knowledge was?
Yes. And so I've tried to look at this from a number of different perspectives, just to kind of be understanding. I've talked to a lot of different people to understand, like, where could Holly's mind have been? Could she seriously not have known, after all these years that she's been speaking to him, that what the truth was about why he was in prison, how that impacted, her wanting her kids to be around him, because most women who have children who don't want their children to be harmed are going to say, there is no way that I would have a sex offender in my home with my children. And so the fact that she knew that already, kind of makes you question what her motives were and what she was thinking. And, at this point, you're thinking, he's been in jail for years. If a 16-year-old, Caitlin Babb, can find out what he's really in prison for, how can a grown adult with 3 kids not figure out in a short period of time what he's really in prison for? So there's really a little bit of, because we're not talking about somebody who you're allowing your kids to go to their house. We're talking about somebody who you're planning on spending a lifetime with. So I honestly had been giving Holly the benefit of the doubt this whole time, and really trying to figure out, was he lying to her? Was he super manipulative? And I'm going to tell you, he was manipulative. And I can see this in black and white with letters in the prison, how he communicated with the judge. Do I think he was a master manipulator? Absolutely not. Because if he was, he would have convinced Caitlin Babb that she wanted to not go forward with things, and he wouldn't have pressured her. He would have made her feel like she wanted to do it, and she would have dropped it. But he didn't do that. He wanted to assert his control. He couldn't help it. He was not controllable. So, which is another reason that I know that within a short period of time, in under a year, he would have revealed exactly who he was. So I really have a hard time with that. So where it really became apparent to me that Holly definitely knew more than what everybody is saying that she knew is that when I saw the autopsies, so I've seen the full autopsy for both Jesse McFadden and Holly McFadden, and I also have seen one of the children's autopsies. And what I can tell you in comparison is that Holly was alive longer than one of the children. That is disturbing. And the reason that is disturbing is because if you think logically, as if you are a criminal, how much sense would it make to leave an adult alive for a very long period of time who is stronger, who is louder, who is going to make a bigger fuss, who has kids there, who if she's fighting like hell to keep her kids alive and her kids safe, she's not going to be an easy person to contain. So that is a little bit disturbing. And then now I have a problem with the autopsies in that I'm really questioning whether they're legitimate. And the reason that I'm questioning that they're legitimate is because I don't believe if there was a ton of drugs found in the home that they were all gonna not have drugs in their system. However, there's drugs also that they didn't test for. They didn't test for the drug GHB. They didn't test for the drug marijuana, which they found marijuana gummies and they found marijuana wax. So there's things like that are questionable as well. So
I think also in our conversations with Caitlin, one of the things that we realized is that Jesse hid his lies in the truth always. And so there was always half truth, half lie in the stories that he told and in the excuses. So he never denied being in prison for rape, but it was statutory and it was a misunderstanding and it was, we started having sex and she no longer wanted to have sex and she made the story up about, and even when she called him out on the truth, he still tried to use a half lie to kind of explain that. So I'm pretty sure that right off the bat that Holly knew that his charge was rape, and she may not have immediately known the extent of it, but knowing that, she could have done a little bit of research and figured it out. The other part of the conversation that I found interesting with Caitlin is that his conversations were always sexual in nature, and they were always on the more aggressive side, almost, I wouldn't even say almost, violent.
Yes. So I can tell you that 100% him and Holly's sexual relationship was not a normal sexual relationship. It definitely was a violent, kinky, fetish relationship. So it wouldn't surprise me if things like bondage things were in there. Obviously, chains and locks is way beyond what you expect in a violent, kinky relationship between a married couple. I will say that I do know that Holly's mom is having a hard time believing all of this, and we have also tried to speak to her as well. As a parent, you don't want to believe anything bad of your children. You don't. And I get that. And not just that, but they're experiencing a very high level of grief because they didn't just lose Holly, they also lost their grandchildren as well. So that's tough. And so your child's not being honest with you. I know that I've lied to my parents when I was younger. There's probably some things, not that I've lied to my parents about as an adult, but that I just don't tell them. So, and not for like this crazy motive, but that's a normal thing. And so, especially if something you're doing you don't think they're going to approve of, you're not going to share. Some of the things that we've seen pattern-wise with Holly is that when she was in her first relationship where she had where she had Rylee and Michael, Cody, when she was with Cody Allen, they had gotten into a big fight. And when they got into this fight, while he left to like cool off, she completely cleared out the house and left with her kids abruptly. So she was fully capable of abruptly leaving a relationship, and a relationship that she felt was kind of volatile. So she left, and she left while she was pregnant. And then during that time, before she has her child, she's already dating Joe Guess, and then they get married right after she has Michael. So is there a belief that maybe she had been cheating on Cody? Maybe, I don't know. But then fast forward and she's cheating on Joe Guess for probably at least half of their relationship. There's a pattern. And then she's speaking to guys in prison. And then we want to say it's surprising that, oh, by the way, now, hey, she's dating this guy who's in prison, and that's somehow unbelievable. I know that that's a really hard pill to swallow, but I think at some point you have to accept the fact that your child was not honest with you, and that's heartbreaking, and I can sympathize with that. But I think the bigger picture is that we need to be fighting for justice altogether, and it would be very helpful if that was everybody, if that was all of the families together. And I think that and I'm speaking for myself right now, but I think that for most people, that if Holly's mom would come forward and say, you know, guys, I'm grieving. This is really tough on me. She lied to us, you know, and I realize that we're finding things, you know, out, you know, for the first time. This stuff is very shocking. You know, I don't even know where to begin. I don't know what to say. I feel guilty. You know, to put those emotions out and be vulnerable with people, people will understand that. People will understand that your kids can do some things sometimes, or be convinced to do some things, you know, and she just that hasn't been how she's conveyed herself. And so it's been very, very hard for people to believe her, or to take her seriously, or to sympathize with her at all.
She says, I'm having a hard time believing one of the 3 kids didn't tell someone within the family what all was happening.
So we know, so there's some messages that went back and forth with Rylee. And what's interesting is that the timing, and we've kind of been trying to determine if these messages were from kids who were in Oklahoma, in Westville, where her mom was when she was there at a certain point in time, or if these were kids who were in Henryetta. And from what we could tell, it might be kids that were in Westville. But the thing is that you might want to assume that that was Joe Guess. We haven't found anything that shows any indication that Joe Guess was doing anything. And we know that Holly's seeing people while she's married and while she's with somebody. So it's not unbelievable that something wouldn't have been reported, you know, during a period of time where she's still even married. So, but go ahead.
I was just going to say, the fact that Rylee would have reported, let's say if it was Joe Guess and it did happen in where is it, Westville? Westville. If it did happen there, she was very courageous in reporting it and calling it out and making the effort. So if it would have happened there, then we would have assumed that it still would have happened in Henryetta with Jesse, because that's her nature. Her nature was to, I'm telling. Something's happening, I'm going to tell. So if it would have happened there, then it would have happened again. This is what makes me believe that this happened in Henryetta. Because if it would have happened previous, then it would have happened again. Right. Because, and he was very, very controlling. And the same way that he tried to control Caitlyn in their situation is the same way he was trying to control the kids. They couldn't go, you know, he was monitoring their phones. He was seeing where they were going. He was tracking them. He probably had spyware on their phone, so he could probably listen into their conversations. He was probably connecting with their friends through their contacts list. This is how he maneuvered. This is how he moved. So we have to assume that this is his MO.
Yeah. Yeah, I believe that to be, you know, to be pretty spot on. And, if Caitlyn did, if Rylee did report anything in Henryetta, obviously it didn't do any good. And that's truly unfortunate. We do know that Rylee was pulled out of school. We don't know why, but kind of coincidentally, it's right after an anonymous call that's made in January. That would be before the March 20th that Jeanette Mayo says that they found out that, Jesse McFadden was a registered sex offender and rapist. And I asked a very direct question about whether or not it could be Lynn who called in January, because she had made a comment about calling, and she didn't answer that question. So, again, when it comes to Holly's family kind of as a whole, it's kind of hard to sympathize with them, because a lot of the information that they give, they can't back up. It's just saying what they feel and what they want to believe, and there's no evidence behind it, and then they kind of hide behind the whole, well, we're not going to say anything until OSBI finishes their investigation. Well, if you haven't noticed, the police have done a pretty crappy job of investigating, and if you want the truth to come out, then you'll want to be a little bit more vocal than keeping your mouth shut until they hide all the evidence. So
we're at time. Maybe it's a good idea maybe to open up the floor for a few minutes for any burning questions before we close out.
Yeah, for sure. If there's any more questions that you guys have, if you have any questions about the autopsies that you want me to explain, anything of that nature, feel free to ask. I will say that one of the things that I definitely did want to address,
Sooner Little Sis says, kids will tell teachers a lot about what is going on in families. Also, who came up with the idea of having a slumber party? That's a great question.
yeah, that is a great question. We don't know who came up with that idea. And, you know, even as a parent, if you were to say, hey guys, you know, would you guys like to have a slumber party with your friends? Most kids aren't going to think that's odd unless something has occurred and, you know, they're like, no, I don't want to have a slumber party. So, you know, but one thing actually that I wanted to make sure that I addressed before we signed off of here was that, you know, I've heard some conversations with people saying that, that the parents who sent their kids over there for this slumber party should have known better, that they should have done better research. And guys, I'm going to be honest. I don't care who these parents are that are saying this. Like, nobody investigates 100% of everybody that their kids are around. And you know what? There's a higher chance of your kids being assaulted in your own home and at school or en route to school or to work than at a slumber party. So it just, and then you have to think about the fact that they had been going over there before, and there was no, you know, somebody's kid would have came and said, hey, you know, mom or dad, something real weird happened. You know, I had a conversation with my stepdaughter the other day, and we were talking about the case, and she mentioned something to me that happened when she was younger, and she said, I've never told my parents this. And she said, you know, talking about this really made me think about this. And she said, I was at a friend's house, and the dad was playing around, and he kept pulling me onto his lap. And she said, I was uncomfortable. And she said, but I wasn't sure that was weird behavior. Like, I was uncomfortable as a young kid because I don't know this guy, and this isn't, you know, like, I just didn't feel right about it. But she said, now as an adult, I think it was highly inappropriate, you know, because she was about 12 or 13 years old. So, you know, is there a possibility that kids don't come out and say things? And, you know, adults are groomed. You know, men are groomed, women are groomed. So it's not unrealistic to think that not all kids are going to say things if they feel threatened, you know, depending on what's been said to them, or if it's progressed through time where they've been being groomed, where they don't even realize, you know, at a certain point that something is grossly wrong.
Or they can also feel guilty thinking they caused it to happen by their behavior. And so they don't want to, now they're feeling like they're being punished for what they did, and so they can't tell. Yeah. So it's really scary.
You know, and I've even theorized, you know, like with Holly, like, well, okay, if she knew, and she was willing, like, to take the risk with her own kids, why in the world would you do it with somebody else's kids? Like, where in your right mind would you think that it would be okay to take that risk with somebody else's kids? And the truth is that I don't think that she was in her right mind, and whatever that mindset was. And I'm having a hard time at this point believing that Holly wasn't involved. And I'm having a hard time believing that with all the automation equipment that was found in there and possible filming equipment that was found in there, that they were not making money doing things on the dark web. One of the things that we know is that Jesse McFadden taught Caitlin Babb how to use the dark web at 16 years old. That's not normal behavior. So, you know, and then the way that the case has been handled has just been very, you know, very suspicious, very bad. You know, somebody who watches a crime show and doesn't know anything about being an investigator could have done a better job at processing that crime scene. And it's just absolutely ridiculous. So, especially when you have multiple agencies on scene.
The car sales lady says, I live in Oklahoma and I have never checked on ODCR for all the parents. I'm very cautious, but I know ODCR hides things also, and we are on the AR line, so you can't always find out. People always blame.
Yeah, it's not something that's always 100% and really easy to find because, think about it, a criminal isn't always going to follow the rules. So when you move from state to state or city to city or county to county, are you always checking in like you're supposed to? Probably not. Yes, that's a requirement for them, but nobody's following them. One of the things that we've talked about is that just like an ankle monitor, sex offenders should have to wear a bracelet that pings everywhere they are. And if you're near a school, they should get a notification that says, hey, Joe Snuffy over here is at the school.
It should be like a dog collar. It shocks them.
That would be awesome. So somebody says, what happened with the other kids who were invited but didn't go? I truly believe Holly was involved at the least as an enabler. I would believe that to be true, at least as an enabler. And even if not an enabler, like she just was allowing for things to happen, and which is just as bad. She couldn't have been completely innocent in the whole thing. The other kids just didn't go. So, which is, obviously
Lucky.
Yeah, they're just extremely lucky that they didn't choose to go. It's so very sad to me. This case has been so very sad to me, and there's so many different elements to this case that it's just truly tragic. And, he didn't just fool Holly's kids' friends. He fooled their parents. He fooled some of the people in the community, but I also believe that he had help in fooling people around him as well,
There's a lot in this case that we haven't shared yet. There's information that we've learned, and as we're continuing to dig, there's certain things that we can't share at this moment because we're still investigating, and we don't want to kind of show our hand until we've gotten more information and we're able to get it to the right authorities to take the right action. So I think that as this case moves forward, more and more information will come out that will illuminate the situation and really show some of the things that will support our arguments in terms of what we believe happened and what we believe is still potentially happening now still. So
yeah, you're going to see a lot of different things come out of this case that you were not expecting to see, and
But we're going to get justice.
Yeah, but we're committed to getting justice no matter what. So whatever should happen and whatever pressure is applied from wherever, we're going to continue to press on and to ensure that all of these families receive justice no matter what. So whoever's out there that's trying to get in the middle and try to stop that from happening, like, it's not going to happen. Like, we are going to 100% make sure that these families receive the justice that they deserve. So if there's not any other questions, we're going to go ahead and let everybody go. If you guys have any questions that you want to send us, feel free to jump on the chat in the group and ask any additional questions that you would like to ask. Sorry, I'm reading something real quick. Somebody said something about not hearing very much in Oklahoma about things anymore. I definitely 100% believe that there is a reason why you're not hearing things, and I believe that they're trying to keep everybody quiet about it. They're trying to let this case die down, and they're doing some serious damage control. And thankfully, we've pulled enough evidence that it's going to be impossible for them to do the kind of damage control that they're trying to do. So you guys are going to see more, some more things coming out, and you're going to start hearing a whole lot more of this case. And I am pretty positive that it's going to become an international case. So, and I'm pretty positive of that. So,
stay tuned.
Yeah, stay tuned. And thank you guys for tuning in and listening to us ramble on. Join us next time, guys. You guys have a good night.